He sits in the mud, the night thick with heat and distant gunfire, clutching a battered cassette player against his chest. Through frayed headphones, Elvis Presley's voice crackles. Can't help falling in love. But Sergeant Lee Gray doesn't think of romance. He thinks of his brother Benjamin, detained back home in Mississippi for refusing the draft to care for their paralyzed mother. With pencil and notebook, Lee writes not to Washington, but to the king himself. You were once a soldier. More than that, you were a voice that listened. He seals the letter in the tape, praying those worn magnetic reels carry his plea across oceans. 2 days later, his entire base vanishes beneath the jungle canopy, leaving only Lee's desperate words waiting to be heard. Sometimes history begins not with an order, but with a single unheard voice. Elvis strolled through Graceland's front hall in the late afternoon light, his boots echoing on the marble floor. He had just returned from a coast-to-coast tour, the applause still ringing in his ears, and his arms were laden with fan mail, wedding invitations, crayon-scribbled drawings, and countless requests for handwritten signatures. He paused before a broad desk piled with letters, each envelope promising narratives of adoration and longing. But amid the familiar swirl of pink stationery and glossy magazine clippings lay something different. A battered cardboard box stamped with military insignia and travel worn from its journey. He lifted it gingerly, noting the frayed tape and the single scrawled word on its side, urgent. Inside, cushioned by crumpled brown paper, he found a folded sheet of stationery and tucked beneath it a diminutive cassette tape. The label on the tape bore a neat handwritten plea. Not a song. A request. Elvis frowned, his practiced smile melting into something more curious. He unfolded the letter in measured silence. The handwriting was neat, each line deliberate. Dear Mr. Presley, my name is Lee Gray, Sergeant, U.S. Army, South Vietnam, 1968. I sat in a trench 2 nights ago, listening to your voice crack through cheap headphones. You sang Can't Help Falling in Love, and for a moment, the thunder of gunfire felt like distant thunder. But I did not write about myself. My brother Benjamin sits in a Mississippi jail, accused of dodging the draft. He cares for our mother. After her stroke, she cannot speak. Ben is innocent, but the law says otherwise. I'm asking you, sir, because you were once a soldier. But more than that, you were the voice that listened to us when we had no one else. If I don't return, tell Ben that he is not a coward. Let my song be his shield. Respectfully, Sergeant. Lee Gray. Elvis read those words twice, feeling the air grow still. He instinctively checked the margins for embellishments. No fanfare, no pleas for money. This was not fame-seeking. It was a man's final hope for his brother. He set the paper aside and lifted the cassette. Its plastic shell was scratched, the lid warped and cracked. No producer's name, no album logo, just the raw promise of a voice waiting to be heard. Late that night, against the pulse of distant crickets on the estate grounds, Elvis slipped into the private studio, an intimate room lined with his own gold records and worn leather sofas. The house lights dimmed to a single lamp over a vintage reel-to-reel that lay dormant beneath silent consoles. He placed the cassette in a battered tape deck, pressed play, and leaned forward. The tape hissed to life, and a voice emerged, steady, tinged with fatigue. I heard your song half a world away. I'm not asking for a serenade. I'm asking for mercy. Then came the sounds of distant explosions and the low ambient hum of military life. And finally, a confession. Ben is no traitor. He didn't turn away from his duty. He turned toward his family. Mama needs him. If you're listening, Elvis, be more than a star. Be a messenger. Elvis sat very still, the words wrapping around him like barbed wire. He listened as Gray detailed his brother's final moments. The broken furniture in the cramped living room back home, the single lamp that flickered while Ben read letters from his sergeant brother stationed on foreign soil. Gray's voice trembled as he spoke of the day he volunteered again to save his younger sibling from prosecution. The tape rattled and paused before the final plea. "If I can't come home, let Ben know his brother believed in him. That was my song." When the recording ended, the studio was heavy with silence. Elvis stared at the blank tape counter as if it might offer answers. He rose and paced the length of the room, mind grappling with the chasm between stadium lights and battlefield trenches. The management's cautionary words from earlier that day echoed in his head. "Don't get involved. This is a legal matter, not your show." But here in the dimly lit sanctuary of his own creation, the distinction between performance and humanity blurred. He retrieved the sheet of stationery, scribbled 3 simple words on its bottom margin. "I'll listen," and pressed the paper into an envelope. It was not a promise of intervention, but the first step beyond his gilded cage. As dawn crept through the studio window, Elvis Presley, the global icon, knew that the next note he sang might not come from his own pen or guitar, but from the bravest voice he had ever heard, a soldier's love for his brother. Elvis slipped off the overnight train in Jackson, Mississippi, his face hidden beneath a low-brimmed hat and dark glasses. He carried no entourage, only a battered satchel containing that single cassette tape and the crumpled letter from Sergeant Lee Gray. He navigated the humid August air toward the county courthouse, its white columns stark against a bruised sky. The building's fluorescent bulbs buzzed inside, casting a harsh glow over linoleum floors scuffed by 1,000 shoes and cold wooden benches bolted to the walls. In the hallway outside, room 207, a clerk in a starched uniform flipped through a docket book. Elvis approached under his alias, Mr. Thomas Rainier, and spoke in a quiet drawl. "I'm here to observe the hearing for Benjamin Gray." The clerk's pencil froze. "You have no standing," she replied, voice clipped. "Only family or counsel may enter." He offered a polite nod and stepped back, drawing in the stale scent of dust and polished leather. From the gallery, Elvis watched Benjamin Gray's case called. The young man, barely 20, stood before a stern judge whose gavel hovered like a threat. Accused of draft evasion, the charge carried a mandatory sentence unless bail was posted. The prosecutor recited Ben's failure to respond to his induction order. Ben's attorney, a trembling trainee in an ill-fitting suit, raised shaky objections about medical exemptions and family dependency, but lacked the evidence or confidence to sway the bench. The bail was set impossibly high. Ben's shoulders slumped as the bailiff escorted him back to a holding cell. As the courtroom emptied, Elvis lingered, every polished word etching guilt into his chest. He resolved to speak to the young man directly. No judge, no publicist, no barrier would stand between them. The jail corridor was narrow and dim, the walls painted a dull institutional green. Doors with small barred windows lined each side, and the distant thrum of a fan beat like a war drum. Elvis surrendered his hat at the front desk, identifying himself only as a concerned friend. The guard eyed him with suspicion, but punched the adjacent door's latch and shoved it open. Inside, Ben crouched on a metal cot, arms crossed over his chest like a prisoner of his own fear. He rose when Elvis stepped in, eyes narrowing at the sight of the star's silhouette. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice iced with fatigue. Elvis removed his glasses and hat, revealing those familiar eyes. Ben's breath caught as recognition sparked. "You're... No." He closed his eyes as if willing it away. Elvis crossed to the cot, setting the satchel on the floor. He retrieved the cassette and handed it to Ben. "Your brother asked me to listen," he said simply. "You deserve your story told." Ben frowned. "I don't need pity." Elvis pressed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. This isn't pity. It's truth. He lifted his own paper, reading Gray's words aloud. He is not a coward. He shields those he loves. The name Lee Gray trembled between them, carrying the weight of trenches and distant gunfire. Ben's arms fell slack. Elvis hit play on a portable recorder, and Lee Gray's voice filled the cramped cell. I heard your song half a world away. My song is for you. The recording crackled, saturated with distant artillery and the sergeant's weary resolve. Elvis remained silent, eyes closed, letting the voice bridge the miles. Ben's posture shifted, first stiff with defensiveness, then softened by the recognition that his sacrifice meant something beyond legal codes. Tears welled as the last plea lingered. Let him know his brother believed in him. In that hush, Ben exhaled. That was him. His voice was small. Elvis nodded, returning the tape. You're not alone here. You have a voice. He produced a pen and scribbled a brief note. I will speak your truth tomorrow. Sliding it through the bars, he gave Ben's hand a firm squeeze before stepping out into the hallway. That night, Elvis checked into a rundown motel near the courthouse. The room smelled of stale coffee and bleach. He sat beside the bed, replaying the cassette through the motel's ancient radio. The sergeant's voice echoed off the peeling wallpaper. Elvis closed his eyes and let the words shape his resolve. He would carry that voice to a larger stage, no matter the cost. In the darkness, he whispered his decision aloud. I can't be silent. And with that vow, he prepared to turn his microphone into a conduit for a brother's silent sacrifice. The theater lights dimmed to a single pale beam as Elvis Presley stepped onto the center of the stage in the Ellis Auditorium, Memphis. No neon glow, no backup singers, only the king, clad in a simple black shirt and dark trousers, his face solemn beneath the spotlight. The hush that fell over the audience was heavy, charged with the unspoken expectation that tonight's performance would deviate from the usual spectacle. Elvis lifted the microphone, its cable curling at his feet like a silent serpent. The band's instruments remained motionless. No drums, no horns, only the electric guitar perched at the side, its strings untouched. For a breathless moment, the only sound was the echo of velvet curtains shifting behind him. Then, in a voice low and unwavering, he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, I've sung for love, for joy, for sorrow. But tonight, I sing for voices that went unheard. This evening is for those cast aside by the rules meant to protect them. For a brother forced into a cell for caring, and for a soldier who gave his last words on a battlefield far away. Their story isn't mine to tell, but their song has found mine, and I will not stay silent. A single chord rang out as Elvis raised his hand, summoning the band. They joined him. An electric guitar, a stand-up bass, a lone piano, careful to hold back any flourish that might distract. The opening riff was spare, deliberate, a simple progression that built tension rather than release. The audience leaned in, sensing this was no ordinary performance. Elvis's voice entered gently, carrying fragments of Sargent. Lee Gray's words woven into new lyrics. He held the line while the darkness fell, a quiet shield where legends dwell. His song untold yet not unsung, a silent vow upon his tongue. The melody grew with each verse, notes punctuated by the bass's heartbeat pulse and the piano's measured steps. On stage, Elvis's posture was rigid, his eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the proscenium arch, as though searching for the man behind that tape. The lyrics painted images of trenches in monsoon rains, homes left empty of laughter, and a brother's vigil at his sibling's cell. No names appeared in the lines, yet every listener felt the weight of the story unspooling. If I don't come home, let it be known. My voice will lie in the songs I've sown. For him who stands where I should stand, I leave my song like a gentle hand. The chorus swelled into a powerful lament, voices rising in harmony for the first time, three backup vocals echoing, "My voice will lie in the songs I've sown," before falling back into Elvis's singular lead. The crowd sat in breathless reverence, faces lit by the stark stage light, tears glinting in the front rows. No one recorded on their phones. This was 1968. And yet every soul in the hall pressed in, wanting to absorb each word. Midway through the final verse, the piano dropped out, leaving only the guitar's gentle pluck and Elvis's unadorned voice. Though halls may echo with louder cries, the quiet soul shall never die. His courage lives in the whispered song, a faithful heart that rights the wrong. The last note lingered, refracting off the balcony's curved railings, until it faded into a silence so complete it felt like an exhale. No applause. Not yet. Elvis closed his eyes, head bowed, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then from the darkness beyond the footlights, a single hand rose in the front row, tentative at first, then joined by another, until the auditorium exhaled into a sustained roaring ovation. The applause was not exuberant jubilation for spectacle, but a deep, collective recognition, a community awakening to the burdens of the unseen. When the clapping subsided, Elvis spoke again, voice gentle and resolute. "Thank you. I did what I could for one soldier and one family. But remember, it's not about the singer or the song. It's about the stories we carry. Let their voices guide you when others choose to look away." With that, he placed his finger to his lips in a hushed farewell, and the curtains closed behind him. The auditorium emptied slowly, faces enlightened and hearts stirred. In countless living rooms across Memphis that night, radios carried the broadcast of Elvis's unorthodox performance, leaving listeners stunned by the simple declaration that, sometimes, the greatest music is born not from fame or glamour, but from the courage to make silence impossible. Several months had passed since that fateful night in the Ellis Auditorium. In a small studio tucked away on a forgotten side street of Jackson, Mississippi, Benjamin Gray sat behind a grand piano that wore its varnish thin. His fingers hovered above the keys, calloused and sure, as he envisioned the trembling hush of a battlefield morning. Around him, the engineer waited in the half-light, reel-to-reel tape machines blinking patiently. Ben closed his eyes and began to play. His composition unfolded slowly, like mist creeping over swamp grass. First, a solitary bass note, then a muted trumpet's soft cry, followed by the gentle brush of drums. He named it Trench 42, after the position where his brother, Lee, had last sent word. No lyrics intruded, only the intimate breaths between notes, the spaces that echoed loss more deeply than any words could. Once finished, he turned to the engineer. "That's it," he said quietly. "Just let it breathe." The engineer nodded, struck by the raw honesty that lingered in the silence after Ben's final chord. They spooled the tape, labeled Trench 42, and sent copies to Memphis, New York, and London under Lee's name, a tribute to the sergeant who had sacrificed, whose voice remained locked inside a battered cassette. Back at Graceland, Elvis Presley opened the package with a reverence normally reserved for sacred objects. He listened alone in his private den, bourbon untouched on a side table as the jazz piece washed over him. In that moment, he made the quietest decision of his life. When he recorded his final live album, an intimate set captured in Nashville's historic Ryman Auditorium, Trench 42, would close the record. He would not promote it, nor demand radio airplay. It would arrive unannounced, slipping in after his last farewell line. On the day the album hit the shelves, fans queued outside record stores at dawn, eager for Elvis's promised encore of gospel favorites and blues-infused ballads. But as the final track played, the mood shifted. Listeners expecting familiar swagger heard instead an elegiac journey through Lee Gray's trenches. It was startling. No solo from Elvis's own voice, only the ghostly resonance of Benjamin's piano and horns. The audience fell into a hushed wonder, uncertain whether they had stumbled onto a hidden track or a mistake in mastering. When the phones lit up at press headquarters, reporters peppered Elvis's publicist with questions. What is this mysterious instrumental? Why include a stranger's composition? Every inquiry was met with a single, consistent reply from Elvis himself. It's not a melody. It's a brother. He refused further explanation, declining interviews and public statements. In one final conversation with a trusted writer, he allowed a single reflection. I've sung until my voice broke, because life demanded it. But when I heard Sergeant Gray's own tune, I realized that sometimes the truest song is one we don't sing ourselves. Years later, after Elvis had departed this world, visitors to Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis found a new memorial lying flat on the red clay earth, a modest bronze plaque beside an unmarked grave. Inscribed in simple steel were 3 lines: "To those who stood their ground in silence and saved others through the quiet of their courage." The marker bore no names, honoring every soldier, every sibling, every soul who bore witness in solitude. On a late autumn evening at Graceland, an elderly caretaker discovered Elvis's final cassette, Trench 42, tucked away in a velvet-lined box. He carried it to the great music room, where portraits of years past watched over mahogany furniture. He threaded the tape into the old player, the hiss of the reel like a distant drum. As Benjamin's melody unfolded once more, the caretaker placed his hand over his heart. No one else was present, yet, in that hushed chamber, Lee Gray's voice lived on, carried in the spaces between notes, reminding all who listen that sometimes the greatest heroism is measured not in shouts, but in the haunting resonance of what remains unsaid.